The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. An Odyssey Through Jerusalem by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 4. On the Orient Express. The incident in front of the Vienna City Temple left me a little unsettled and perplexed, and clouded my stay in the Austrian capital considerably. We gave our eyewitness report on record at a police station in the evening, but were explicitly told that we did not know why the dispute in question had occurred, and that it was also conceivable that it was the Jew who had started the dispute. However, the victim was not able to be interrogated, so we left our descriptions of the perpetrator and returned to the hotel, with the clear knowledge that the police were not very interested in clarifying the incident. However, the senior official had a dedication written and signed by the famous Sherlock Holmes, fittingly in his edition of the Austrian Criminal Code. After the official recording of our statement was quickly completed, we were able to resume our original plan for the evening and attend a performance in the famous court opera. Since we only had this one day, we had to take what was currently on the programme. With Mozart's Magic Flute, however, the offer seemed quite appropriate to us. The dazzling and spectacularly equipped magic posse was a welcome 3-hour distraction from reality for me. Holmes, on the other hand, found the staging uninspired and overloaded for the eye, which distracted from the music. "Maybe you should buy one of these modern gramophone devices," I suggested after the performance. "Then you can fully focus on the listening experience." But Holmes refused. "That's out of the question," he replied. "Although it is a very impressive technique to record and replay tones, sounds, and voices, the quality of the reproduction is miserable. No serious music lover would do that to himself. This method is at best suitable for the operettas of our former client, Mr. Strauss. It wouldn't matter in his case." "But Holmes," I disagreed, "you don't want to doubt the talent of the waltz and operetta king?" My friend shook his head with a smile. "Not his talent, just his focus. He should have stayed with dance music." It was almost midnight when we arrived back in our suite at the Hotel Sasha. We went to bed quickly, because the next morning the onward journey would surely exhaust us soon enough. I dreamed of Papageno in a feathered garb and of Egyptian temples, which had successfully suppressed the unpleasant experience of the real Jewish temple in my subconscious. Sigmund Freud, the Dr. Sigmund Freud, who was currently busy with dream interpretation in Vienna, would have had fun analyzing this dream. The following day, we got up early in the morning to get ready for departure. We took a horse-drawn carriage back to the Empress Elizabeth station in front of the former line wall, and were impressed when we saw our new means of transport. The Orient Express, coming from Paris, could not be compared to the barren Belgian sleeping car that had taken us from Ostend to Vienna. Of course, the space was still limited, but the equipment proved to be luxurious. A dining car with exquisite dishes and a salon with every drink you could wish for. The sanitary facilities available to each compartment were up to date, and the furniture would have fit in any city palace. The heat supply was sophisticated and provided a homely atmosphere. It was immediately imminent that this train is only intended for the upper society, not for the common people who have to make do with wooden benches when travelling by train. Be that as it may, our tickets had already been paid for by the British government. And so, without further ado, the train rode to the east via Budapest, Belgrade, and Sofia. The route led to Constantinople, where we were to meet with a representative of the Sultan's government. We spent some time on the long train ride now in the salon, where all sorts of interesting people could be found. Holmes also turned into a social butterfly, and soon I realized that he himself was a prominent attraction among all the wealthy, educated, and successful fellow travellers. The great detective from London, who had already solved so many sensational cases. To describe them all in details, Holmes usually referred to my person. While he was engrossed in a conversation with an archaeologist from Salzburg, a young lady with a French accent turned to me. "Excuse me," the very attractive woman began when she came to my table. "You're the butler of Sherlock Holmes, aren't you?" I had already gotten up according to etiquette, but the promising acquaintance had immediately set in with a faux pas. "Well, mademoiselle, I'm a little more than a butler," I replied, a little offended, but still keeping up a friendly facade. "I stand by my good friend as an employee and consultant." "So you are his assistant?" the lady added. "Let's hope," I replied, "that this was not the portrayal of Mr. Holmes that led to the assessment. We see eye to eye and are partners with nothing but mutual appreciation and deep, indissoluble affection that comes from the heart." "Oh," it escaped the young woman, "I didn't know you had that kind of relationship. But as far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly fine, although certainly biased parts of society consider it immoral or even a blasphemous sin. In England, people seem to be a bit more open-minded, and also, in my opinion, love is made for all people." It was confused for a few seconds before I could grasp the actual misunderstanding. "But no," I stuttered. "Holmes and I are not a couple. We only live together." The lady nodded sympathetically. "Of course," she said, "it will be a few more decades before the Church of England will also bless such relationships with an official wedding. For my part, I have doubts about monogamy anyway." Apparently, I had not yet succeeded in clarifying the situation. "I assure you," I made a new attempt, "that the relationship between Sherlock Holmes and me is completely platonic, a normal male friendship. After all, I was married, and I am only interested in women." "As you think," the young woman replied, giggling, "but don't worry. Your secret is in good hands with me." With these words, she winked at me and walked back towards the bar. I looked at her as irritated as I was regretful, but then turned my gaze to Holmes, who was sitting 2 tables away. He noticed that I was staring at him, apologized to his archaeological interlocutor, and came to me. "Is everything okay, Watson?" he asked, astonished. "Do you think I look unmanly?" I asked a counter-question. Holmes looked at me briefly, then he said, "But no, not yet. You're a strong, handsome guy." He put his right hand on my shoulder. At that moment I noticed that the young lady at the bar was watching us, and winked at me again when our eyes met. I shook off my friend's hand and said, "All right, Holmes, I will now retire to my compartment." But when I wanted to leave the saloon car, the train stopped abruptly and somewhat jerkily, so that some passengers had to struggle briefly to keep the balance. We were on the open track in the middle of nowhere. Through the windows, only the wintry landscape of the Balkans could be seen. While we were all speculating about what might have happened, Holmes finally noted, "Probably a snowdrift blocking the rails. We will have to wait until a locomotive comes from the next station that has a plough attachment at the front." Soon after, an excited French conductor came in, confirming my friend's assumption. But he had other things to say, for which he wanted to talk to Holmes and me privately. "Gentlemen," he began quietly, "there is a second train stuck, namely the Orient Express from Constantinople to Paris, which runs in the opposite direction. We have made contact, and there is likely to be a problem there. Apparently, a murder took place in the through carriage to Calais." "A murder on the Orient Express?" I asked. "What an absurd story." "It's true," the conductor insisted in a whisper. "Monsieur Holmes, you are a well-known detective and understand criminal investigations. Would you possibly be willing to help secure the crime scene?" Holmes didn't think twice and agreed. "Of course. I will still have to get my coat out of my apartment. I understand that the other train should be a quarter of a mile away. The steam whistles are quite telling." Holmes was already trying to get away with the conductor, but I held him back briefly. "Shouldn't I accompany you?" But Holmes said no. "Just stay here, Watson. I will be able to handle this matter on my own." Then he added quietly, "Besides, my friend, I think the lady at the bar is keeping an eye on you." Now it was he who winked at me, and then set off. I stayed behind in the saloon car to wait for things. I preferred not to contact the young woman from France again. Instead, I had a glass of whisky. After all, they had the best products from the Scottish Highlands in their assortment. Of course, an American fellow-traveller was promptly found who wanted to teach me about the perks of Kentucky bourbon, but he proved to be more of a gourmand than a gourmet. It took 2 hours for Holmes to return and free me from the American. His coat and cap were covered in snowflakes, but he himself was apparently at his best. "You're finally here," I began. "I've missed you, old friend." Holmes, of course, noticed that I was a little drunk, but didn't go into it. "My help is not needed any more," he said. "A murder actually happened, even a rather committed one. A businessman from the United States was stabbed in his bed with 12 stab wounds." That seems a little frenzied to me," I murmured and emptied my glass. "On the other hand, Julius Caesar did not fare much better." My friend was struck by lightning. "You're a genius, Watson," he noted. "It was not one perpetrator who stabbed the victim a dozen times, but several perpetrators. 12, possibly. I have to go back immediately." Once again, Holmes left me standing and disappeared from the salon to visit the other Orient Express. I was flattered by his remark about my apparently brilliant contribution to the investigation, although I had no idea what followed. This time, it only took 20 minutes for Holmes to stand in front of me again. I only had time for 2 more glasses. "Have you solved the case?" I immediately asked. "Well, I certainly contributed," Holmes replied, "and so did you." "No problem. Always at your service," I proclaimed jokingly. "After all, we're equal partners, aren't we?" Holmes didn't know what to do with this remark, so he just nodded. "Since the snowplow has now arrived, both trains can continue," he said. "The final solving of the case in the other train is in capable hands. Coincidentally, a Belgian colleague was also on board, a detective from the Ardennes, who, with the help of my clues, will now undoubtedly convict the perpetrators and hand over a completed investigation to the Serbian authorities. The murder on the Orient Express has all but been solved."